never going to be able to have sex with you again. On that very day, if someone would have just told me there was this vacuum erection device, if you want to get a hard on, this device will do it. If I would have just known that, that might have kept me from having those thoughts.
Anal cancer was part of my offering sexually. This is what I bring to the bed. And when you take that away, it does take mentally and spiritually away part of your identity. For me, it did mentally break me down. It's like, what am I good for in this relationship?
It made my marriage effectively sexless, which led to the breakdown of the marriage. And yeah, there were times I was suffering suicidal ideation. I was in a pretty dark place, and I assumed I would never re-partner. Who's going to take this on? You know, the guy with stage 4 cancer and erectile dysfunction.
3 men, 3 completely different experiences. Stage 4 prostate cancer, anal cancer with an ostomy, a prostatectomy that led to suicidal depression before a vacuum pump changed everything. And the same wall of silence around what treatment does to your body, your desire, and your sense of who you are. Today on Kicking Cancer's Ass, I am thrilled to revisit sex and cancer with 3 really interesting men. Tim Baker, living the dream. He's a surf rider with a beautiful family, walks to the waves when out of the blue, a stage 4 prostate cancer changed everything. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what happened, about his book, Petting the Shark, and dating in your 50s as a cancer survivor. Daniel Garza has been navigating health, identity, and intimacy, including AIDS, anal cancer, and ostomy, agoraphobia, sobriety, with his partner Christian besides him. He's lived the compounding effect of diagnosis after diagnosis on a relationship. Mike Prescott and his beautiful wife Shirley join us. Mike overheard nurses casually discussing male castration and then found out it was for his case before anyone talked to him about what treatment might do to his sex life. 3 weeks after his prostatectomy, he found himself having suicidal thoughts. But now, 3-4 years later, he and Shirley, who's gone through her own cancer treatment, are having more sex than before his surgery. So if you or someone you love has gone through cancer and is wondering if they'll ever feel desire again, whether their partner sees them in the same ways or how to start the conversation, this is the guy's version of sex and cancer. So welcome back. Kicking Cancer's Ass, the podcast rewriting cancer's story, putting you in control. I'm Joelle Kaufman, and today we tackle sex and cancer from the men's perspective, what nobody tells you, what changes, and what you can do about it, with Daniel Garza, Tim Baker, and Mike and Shirley Prescott. Hi, guys. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Awesome. So let's just jump into it. And let's talk about, when the women were on, they said nobody brought it up. Nobody talked about what cancer treatment, what surgery was going to do to their sex life. How about for you guys? What did you not know about how cancer treatment was going to change your sex life? And what do you wish someone had said to you before it started? Who wants to go first?
I could say I was given very little information about the nature of hormone therapy when I was prescribed it. I think there's the kind of obligatory fact sheet that you're given when you're prescribed any medication, but it was pretty blunt. I think there was just a general kind of statement that it would affect sexual function and libido, but there was no offer of any ways to manage those effects. And I think it was more or less implied that that element of your life was over and behind you and you should just kind of get used to it, which was pretty disheartening.
I would think so. On top of a cancer diagnosis, you're told, and Tim and Daniel, I know you were both pretty young, and Mike, your story is you were not going to tolerate not having a sex life with your wife. And so how did that feel to hear such a thing? And what did you do with that, Tim?
It was the first office that I visited when I was diagnosed, and I subsequently changed offices, changed practitioners after that. But I didn't know anything at all about prostate cancer. I guess as most people know it just sneaks up on you. And so when I was in the room and the physician had given me the digital exam and told me about the tumor size and things like that, that's when he walked out, and I could hear the nurses talking outside the door, and they were talking about male castration. And I had no idea. It's a lack of education on my part what they were talking about. And so when they came back in, I said, who is the poor guy, that's going through male castration? And they said, well, we're talking about, potential treatment for you. And that was how I was approached with it. And it was soon after that is when I changed physician offices. Not that I don't understand now in the education as to what they were speaking about, but they could have possibly explained it in a different way, was the way I look back on it now. So that was kind of my baptism by fire, so to speak, into the potential treatments. At that time, we didn't know what a Gleason score on my situation was or anything. We didn't know what the diagnosis was going to be. That appointment was leading up to a test where they go in and take samples, the biopsies for prostate cancer. So I guess all I'm saying is that was before anything was ever even diagnosed. I was approached with that. So it scared me. I'll be honest with you.
I'm sure it did. And Daniel, what about you? What was your experience?
Sure. So let's talk about sex, baby. And there was no conversation about it. I think the idea when you go in for the diagnosis and they're like, okay, so we have a treatment plan for you. We're going to go deep chemo radiation, and you're going to be happy that you don't have cancer anymore. And yes, there is definitely that grateful side that, yay, I don't have cancer. Uh, but at the time, Christian and I was diagnosed on May 5th. Our anniversary was May 9th. We were days away from our third anniversary. So in my comedies, I say we still had that new boyfriend smell, and we were celebrating the honeymoon. And I don't think the doctor, and really at that moment, I don't think we kind of considered like, well, how is our intimate life going to be like? Well, what is sex going to be like? You're on that defense mode. It's like, let's fight to stay alive. That was it. But I think that was precisely the moments to have this conversation and say, yes, we're going to get rid of the cancer. Yes, we have a plan in motion. We strategized this. We're ready to go. Let's talk about the after effects. And we didn't talk about it. And there's still, I believe that 10 years plus after my diagnosis, there are still things that we haven't talked about when it comes to intimacy and sex and relationships.
You and Christian, or you and your
Correct.
doctors?
Yeah, all of it. Well, my doctor, I don't see my doctor anymore. We broke up. I was like, I'm done with you. But Christian and I think that even because he was my caregiver, and not to bring that part of the conversation in, as my caregiver, we let go of the intimate side of our relationship. It was patient and caregiver. Then when I was better, it was harder for him to break away from being a caregiver. So those traumas are still lingering, and there's still conversations that Christian and I have not had.
Interesting. So, what would any of you want to tell a doctor? Because I don't think doctors do this on purpose. I think they are focused, Daniel, like you said, I'm going to save your life. And okay, check. We're good with that. We want that. What would you want them to say to you? And I also want to prompt Mike took a rather different and fairly strong advocacy approach with this as he took control of his treatment plan. But Mike, do you want to tell that story first? And then
Sure.
You guys say like, okay, doctors, here's what we want you to say to us when we're panicked that we have cancer and we want to have, a sexual life after you save our lives. But Mike, could you tell your story? Because it's a great story of advocacy.
I guess to preface this, I realize now, almost 4 years into the situation, into the diagnosis, that people are being diagnosed at all different stages. And I didn't know that to start with. I didn't know what a stage of prostate cancer was, much less I had no idea what stage I was in. Uh, I'm like everybody else. If I have to be completely honest, the word first time that I heard cancer, all I could think about was the cancer. I had no idea at that moment what the cancer and or the treatments would do to my sex life. It was once that diagnosis was made and I did see the ultimate guy who did the surgery on me, that was when we started our advocacy campaign with him, uh, finding out that we were fairly early in the prostate cancer diagnosis was a huge advantage. I know that now. And I do not want anyone out there to think, okay, well, we were further along. We had to do things like this. I get that now. I understand. But we were up front with our surgeon. I told my wife once I had time to process the word cancer and do a little studying on my own, I found out that the sex life was going to be in jeopardy, whichever form of treatment that we went with. So when we did go in and see the surgeon for a consult, and we were very fortunate to have a robotic surgeon locally within 50 miles that had done over 2,500 of these things. So that was what I was told to look for, someone who was not a rookie at that point. And so we told the doctor, said, hey, our sex life is top of the line, and we do not want to lose that. And when I keep saying we, I was doing a lot of the talking. I just told him, I said, I do not want to lose that ability to make love to my wife. And we've had that ever since we were in our early years. And so he said, okay, here's the deal. So the surgeon was generally aware of all the situations with the potential problems with the sex life. And he said, well, a lot of people come through here. They're past that point in their life. He said, I understand that you all are not. I can't look at your age and make that assumption. I am taking this to heart. He said, we have nerve sparing surgery now, of which at that time I didn't have a clue what that meant. But he said, I will take my utmost care. And he said, hopefully, he kept saying, within 18 to 24 months, he said, this will be like a blip on the radar screen. And you should recover, even sexually, you should recover. So I was fortunate to have the surgeon who was, I think, very open with us about that. But that was what I would tell anybody now. I have told people, make sure, especially if you're 50, 60, 70 years old, make sure the doctor knows that you're still having an active sex life. I think my wife got a little bit tired of me saying it to him, like, we got an active sex life. And everything I had read was be very, very vocal about that. And it puts it in their mind because doctors are doctors, and their first line on this is to get rid of the cancer. And every one of us have to be honest. Yes, I wanted to get rid of the cancer, but as I learned more, I wanted to also have it both ways, so to speak.
All right. Thank you for that. So, Daniel or Tim, what would you want doctors to have said to you as you started down this journey and, you have cancer? What would you want? What should they do?
Yeah, look, I've seemed to have stumbled into a bit of a patient advocacy role, and I'm really big on the sort of ideas of shared decision making and informed consent. And I don't feel like I was given enough information to actually give informed consent to this treatment. So I was diagnosed, my situation's a bit different. I was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. It was metastatic at diagnosis, which means it had already spread to the bone. So, I'm being told I'm going to die, excuse me, from this condition, that it's incurable. So sex is kind of the last thing on your mind. And it was just very perfunctory. We're going to get you started on hormone therapy. And then the strong recommendation was also to have chemotherapy at the same time. So that's a pretty intense double whammy. But yeah, I wish I'd had it more fully explained to me. There were really simple things I could have done from the outset to try and maintain sexual function, just using something like Viagra or a vacuum pump or needles, which I've sort of since discovered kind of by myself through my own research. But I think all those things should be discussed really openly at the outset. And even if you're being given a pretty grim prognosis, I was 50 when I was diagnosed. My then wife was 42 at the time. And so the idea of lifelong celibacy at that age is pretty daunting. And in effect, it did cost me the marriage. The marriage didn't survive because, I don't think we were given adequate guidance on how this treatment would affect us and our relationship. And I think relationship counselling and some emphasis on the need to maintain intimacy in whatever form that takes is really important. And I wish we'd had better guidance from the outset.
Absolutely. And, sex and intimacy is good for you. It helps your body. It releases hormones. It's what I call a happiness tripwire, right? Like whatever type of intimacy you have releases dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, which make you feel good, make you feel close, but they also boost your immune system. I mean, it's literally good for you. So Daniel, you had this caregiver-patient dynamic, but what would you want the doctors to have said to you? And I just want to point out, Tim, your diagnosis was in 2015. So, right? So you're 11, 12 years.
Yeah, 10 and a half. It was July 2015, July 7, 2015. I never forget that date. Yeah. And I've already outlived my prognosis. So, when you're facing your mortality, as I said, you're not really thinking about sex. And it's only then I've lived as long as I have that's then become a priority.
Okay. So sorry, Daniel, I wanted to give you the floor. What do you want the doctors to say?
Tim and I are both 2015 cancer babies. So, and not that you want to celebrate that together, but we have that. Something I wish the doctors had talked about that I know now, I obviously didn't know then, is since then I've become a Reiki master and I work a lot with energy. And part of the spiritual coaching that I do is how to align mind, body, and spirit. And you know that you have cancer, your body feels the cancer, but we forget about the spirit and how that breaks down and how recoup times and connecting times and going back to work time, like all that is in your spirit and how you put it all together. I wish there was more emphasis on the whole person, not just the cancer. Again, thank you doctors for focusing on the cancer, and thank you therapists for walking my mind through that journey. But we forget about the spirit, and I'm listening to Mike and Shirley's story, and I'm like, wow, he was like, no, you will not break my spirit. I want this to be part of my life. I wish Mike had been my life coach when I was going through my own cancer journey, because that's what we need. And I wish more doctors would think that our life is not just about overcoming cancer and coming to grips with it, but how is your spirit going to handle it post cancer?
So I have a funny sex and cancer story. When I was diagnosed, and you guys don't know much about me, but I'm a 43-year multi-generational. So I was the 12th diagnosis. So my family has talked about cancer since I was 13. But here I am diagnosed the day before I was supposed to have a preventative mastectomy. And I was told you have to use a condom for sex when you have chemotherapy. So, I'm a rule follower. We've been married, I'm not as long as Mike and Shirley, but I've been married for almost 28 years. So suffice to say, condoms have not been part of our sexual menu anytime in memory. And so here we are like, oh my God, we're like kids again. And I'm complaining about it to my sister, who's also a cancer survivor. And she says, why are they making you use condoms? Is the chemotherapy dangerous to your husband? I said, I don't know. They just said use condoms. So I went back and asked, and I asked a specific questions. Are the condoms to protect my husband from chemo, or are they to prevent accidental pregnancy? And they said, oh, accidental pregnancy. I was like, I have no ovaries. If I get pregnant, it's the Messiah. Like, it's not a problem. But and by the way, that's in my medical record. That's not like a hard one to know that like accidental pregnancy wasn't a concern. I'm also in my mid 50s, so like wasn't a concern on lots of fronts. Anyhow, I bring you some humor. Now, for women, especially with mastectomies, which I think Shirley, you're a cancer survivor as well. Right. Like we go through, am I going to be desirable? Am I even going to enjoy sex? Like, for men, sex is often the ability to perform, the ability to be a man. How did this assault on your sexuality affect your identity? And Tim, I want to start with you because I think you've actually written about this.
Yeah. I've written a book sort of documenting my cancer journey, as you said. It was profound. I can remember feeling like some kind of essence of me was being drained away. And I felt a complete loss of libido, a complete loss of erectile function. It made my marriage effectively sexless, which led to the breakdown of the marriage. And yeah, there were times I was suffering suicidal ideation. I was in a pretty dark place. And my then wife and I separated about 3.5 years ago. And I assumed I would never repartner. I assumed that, well, who's going to take this on? The guy with stage 4 cancer and erectile dysfunction. But yeah, much to my surprise, I guess the man drought must be more severe than I realised because, I found myself dating in my late 50s and early 60s, and that's been a revelation. And that's, probably a longer conversation. But, it profoundly altered my sense of self. There were some silver linings. I feel like I'm a better person. And ironically, I kind of feel like maybe I'm a better man with low or no testosterone. And certainly I've had some interesting feedback from the women I've dated along those lines who seem to kind of appreciate the fact that they're not with someone who's going to overwhelm them with male desire. And that's been a really interesting journey. I can speak about that at more length at some point, but I don't want to take up too much of the talking stick.
No, but I think that's real. Part of why I wanted the three of you is because you all represent different lenses. I mean, you all have your own unique experience, but your marriage didn't survive it, but you dated and you date. And, Daniel, you had to navigate this caregiver to lover transition with your own set of new or different body parts. And then you have the married couple. I guess you and Christian are also partnered. But, the 48, is it 48 years? Mike, Shirley?
49, coming up in
49 years.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is a real long marriage. Exactly. And, things change. So, Daniel, how did this impact your sense of identity, of self?
Yeah. So there were things that we hadn't thought about, and because I'm also an ostomy, so I had an ostomy a year later in April of 2016. So that also changes the way you look. There's a lot of body dysmorphia that happens, all that comes up. But sexually, since we're talking about sex, sexually, I grew up sexually as a submissive, or as we call it, the dick made bottom. So anal cancer was part of my offering sexually whenever I had a boyfriend, a partner. This is what I bring to the bed, not to the table, or sometimes the table. but this is what I bring to the bed. And um,
That might be TMI,
so
but I love it.
you know, we're all here, and so as a new couple, and still figuring out, at 3 years, like where we are sexually and how we're working together, and me as a gay man coming into this relationship and saying, "This is what I'm offering you sexually. This is my intimacy gift for you," and not having those conversations before going into treatment and not realizing what the limitations were. The way that I identified as a gay man for most of my adult life was taken away. And although people in conversations and in group settings have said, but you're alive and there's other ways you can have intimacy and there's other, and I'm like, thank you for that. I realize
Mm.
it, but this is what I want to do. This is
Hmm.
what my sexual cravings, this is what I want to do. And when you take that away, it does take mentally and spiritually away part of your identity. So to regain that with your partner who has now seen you, I was 123 pounds at my worst, who has seen you at your worst, throwing up, taking medications. There is a disconnect. And when you're trying to reconnect, and I don't have that same gift to bring to him, it does mentally, for me, it did mentally break me down. It's like, what am I good for in this relationship? So it took some time to realize that there were so many other things that I had to offer in the relationship besides my butt. And but it took some time to learn that. And there are still times when I feel inadequate, when I feel like I'm not giving you everything that you would want. Am I everything that you need in this relationship? The day that I was diagnosed, on the way home in the car, I looked at him, I said, if you want to leave,
Mm.
this is the moment.
Mm.
Leave
Mm.
now. I'll tell people that I broke up with you and that I didn't want you to be part. I'm like, because if you break up with me when I'm going through treatment, you'll be the ass that broke up with the cancer patient. Just so you know, but he stuck around. But there is that sense of insecurity that comes up once in a while. And no matter how much therapy, no matter how much spirituality or how much I pray, it still creeps up from the back of your head going, are you good enough? Are you really the best thing for him? Should you walk away? But here we are. We'll be 14 years in May. And
Yay.
yeah, something worked out. I guess my cooking keeps him around. So that works.
And it sounds like, like Daniel, it sounds like you found a good man and he found a good man and, you're working it through.
Yes, just don't tell him that because it'll go to his head. We don't want
No.
that.
All right. So don't show him this episode. So what about you, Mike? I mean, you made it really clear. I'm not doing this if I can't have a vibrant sex life with my wife, but you had your moments where you weren't sure that it was going to work.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
what did that do to your identity and your hopes for your golden years with your bride?
I think that if you fast forward 3 weeks after my surgery,
Mm.
that's when I was in the shower, and I couldn't literally walk across the floor without leaving a trail of urine. And so I know that that's probably the TMI that you're talking about, but that's the reality of what my situation was. And I said, my God, if I can't even, hold my urine, I certainly can't think about having sex. And at that time, that was a pipe dream to me anyway. But I got to reading and listening to my therapist, my physical therapist, probably meant the most to me out of all of this because she was working on that urinary issue for me as far as exercises and all the other types of therapy. And it wasn't until she brought in uh, an ultrasound machine that actually at a friend of hers office, they didn't have one at the office. And when they put me on the ultrasound and showed me the exercises I was doing them all wrong. And I didn't know. And so once I saw that, once my eyes saw that on a screen, how to control the muscles, that made a lot of difference for me. But flipping that back, when I was in the shower that day and I was so down and depressed, I had just come off of a walk And that's all you can do in that first few weeks of recovery, or that's at least all I did was walk. And so I was out walking, and I was having all those dark thoughts that Tim was talking about, and I'm sure that's a lot about what he was talking about. And I just was caught myself walking down the sidewalk beside oncoming traffic, and I said, I can end this right now. I don't have to deal with this. And it's so morbid to think about, but I didn't really think about taking that step out there, but the thought that it crossed my mind is what scared me. And I got home and I just broke down in the shower, and my wife was saying, what's the matter? I said, well, I'm never going to be able to, use the bathroom correctly again. And I know that these are minimal issues, but at that moment they seemed like giants. And I said, I'm never going to be able to have sex with you again. And I think the big point that I want to bring up now is something that actually I just thought about this evening. On that very day, if someone would have told me, you're talking about wishing you had have known something, if someone would have just told me there was this vacuum erection device, because see, I didn't find that out until later in the process. If someone would have told me, said, hey, if you want to get a hard on, this device will do it. It might not feel completely normal, but we have a device that will do it. If I would have just known that, okay, I wouldn't have even had to have the device in my hand or know how to use it yet. But if I had just known that information, that might have kept me from having those thoughts. Because certainly once we did find out about a week later about a vacuum erection device, and the reason that they said they didn't tell me about it was because I was too early in my recovery. And I'm thinking, God, if I just knew that was there in the beginning of this, then I would have known, okay, I can get through this 3 or 4 weeks here. And then when I'm recovered enough, because during the prostatectomy, they have to cut your urethra, and then they have to sew that back together and stuff. So that's the reason they don't want you, doing activity like that too early on. So that's kind of the story about my suicidal ideation. But my therapist, my physical therapist, gave me a paper on my next visit in and said, hey, you can order this vacuum erection device. And I said, a what? It will do what? And you do what with it? And when I started reading and educating myself, because as I told my wife, and we talked about all of our lives, we have shied away from sex toy stores. And that's kind of what I wish, if talking about if I could go back 10 or 15 years in my life, I wish I'd have known about these things then. Because I would have sure not considered them sex toys. I would consider them sex aids. And as I told Melissa on the Penis Project, I said, geez, I always went into the doctor's office, and when it would come that part of your physical to where they would say, Mike, are you having any trouble in the bedroom? And, the guy's bravado, no, I'm not having any trouble. My wife seems happy, and yeah, macho man. And yet now I wish I would have said, I think I'm okay, but what are you suggesting? And, I wish I had that back. But at the same time, the suicidal thought was the low point of everything. And previous to that, they had given me something to settle my nerves. And it turns out that the prescription medication was also not good for erections. So I immediately stopped taking that medication because my wife's connection with me convinced me I had a lot to live for. And once I found out about the vacuum pump, I can honestly say the vacuum pump may have saved my life, much less an erection. It may have saved my life.
It's a good tool for exercise.
Yeah, it is.
So I want to go to the tools. And I want to go to the TMI without anyone, embarrassing their partner or anything like that. But I have no idea what a vacuum erection pump is. I'm not sure that other people know. Tim, you mentioned needles, you've mentioned medication. Daniel, you've faced anal cancer with an ostomy. Like, how do you guys make sex work?
Who
I don't know.
I mean,
Daniel's dancing up there. I'm feeling like we're going to get, okay. We're
Go
going
for
to
it,
the
Daniel.
X-rated version of this podcast. Daniel's undressing. All right. How do you make sex work? What should people know?
I could tell a story about the first woman I dated, whose name I won't mention, but I call her the defibrillator because she kind of brought me back to life, and it was kind of amazing because I approached relationship with great insecurity and great sort of vulnerability, and one of the first, and she'd read my book, so she knew my situation. And one of the
Tell
first
them
things
your
she
book's
said,
name.
it's called Patting the Shark. Yeah, Patting the Shark. And yeah, it's been really well received here in Australia, and it's been an incredibly gratifying experience putting that out into the world. But yeah, so the first time I found myself dating, this woman said to me, "What do you think is the most sexy part of a man's body?" And I thought, this is probably a pretty important question to get right. And I thought, their mind. And she said, no, these. And you've got two of them that work perfectly well. And I went, yeah, so I do. And she just kind of took charge and kind of, led me into an exploration of intimacy and sensual touch. And I mean, erection and penetrative sex was possible with the aid of something like Viagra or needles, which sounds really off-putting, but you can use an injection to induce an erection. But she was quite a strong feminist, and her thing was, we need to decenter the penis, we need to decenter erections, and make this a playful exploration. And it was honestly the best possible thing for me because it took the pressure off any sort of performative aspect. And so I wasn't hung up on whether or not I could get an erection. Sometimes it was possible, sometimes it was less so, but it just became this really joyful discovery. And I think it's a bit like, people say if you lose one physical sense, the other senses are heightened. Like if you don't have your sense of sight, then hearing and touch become really elevated. Because penetrative sex was not so much the focus, there was this enormous pleasure just in touch. And so it was kind of mind-blowing, and it gave me a whole different appreciation for what intimacy could be in a relationship. I remember a friend of mine, I'm a surfer, so I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a longboard champion. I don't know if you know much about surfing, but longboards are the traditional old 9-foot boards where most surfers ride shortboards these days. And he said to me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Do you know why longboarders make better lovers?" And I said, "No, Bo, tell me." He said, "Because longboarders let the wave rub up against them and respond to its cues rather than imposing themselves upon it."
Wow.
And I thought, that sounds like good advice. So yeah, I sort of took that on board, and that seemed to be pretty well received as an approach.
That's amazing. And I love what she said about your hands. We had Kara with the women. She's a romance novelist, also a writer like you, Tim. But she said, for women, at least, the biggest erogenous organ is the brain. And so hands, talk, sensuality is intimacy.
She also gave me a copy of a book on female sexuality called Come As You Are, which I would recommend to anyone. It was such a fantastic education. I mean, late in life, but better late than never. And so I was having this amazing kind of education in female sexuality, and it was less about, I think men, this is a generalization, but can come a bit sort of self-centered in terms of their own pleasure. And I kind of felt like I was more interested in giving pleasure. And yeah, that was a good discovery.
Fascinating. All right. Well, let's switch to Daniel. Like, Daniel, how do you make it work? I mean, again, losing this primary
Yeah.
sexual experience that you enjoyed.
Uh, you have to find alternatives. Let me just disclaimer: I've never been much of a cuddler person. I'm not the cuddly person. I always say that when it comes to sex, I'm more of a cat than a dog. Like I don't just talk about like you come to me when I'm ready. And uh, so coming into the relationship, uh, we had to figure out other ways to keep the relationship strong. There's And I know it sounds, but it is. It's sharing food. It's watching a movie together. It's um, me lowering my walls and my own insecurities about my body and allowing a moment to cuddle in bed is having a kissing moment and enjoying it and not feeling ashamed or intimidated or uh, it's a defense mechanism. It's not rejecting my partner, thinking he's going to reject me, and just allowing him to hug me and feel my body. And sometimes the ostomy bag is a little fuller than others, and not feel ashamed about that. We really had to focus on the other sides aside from because radiation did cause shrinkage and problems with erections, and obviously anal cancer. I can't have anal sex,
Mm,
so it's like, how can I let my partner know that I
mm,
still find him attractive, that I still want to be with him, and in turn being open enough to accept that he loves me and that it's not a pity hug. Uh, so it's been a big balance. Again, I'm 10 years, almost 11, and present and speak, and there's still times that I learn something new about intimacy that I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't know we could connect at this level. Um, the joke in our house is that the best 3 ways we have is when DoorDash delivers food because we both love to eat and watch movies at home. So you just laughter has been one of the most amazing things for us. We laughed from the moment I got diagnosed because this is going to give me permission to do all the butt jokes I can, and I still do them, as you can tell. Um, and we laughed through it. We laughed now, and I think for us, laughter, laying in bed watching TikTok videos, and just being next to each other is such a precious moment, and I value that so much more than just having an orgasm. I miss the orgasms, but when, when lack of laugh.
Love that. Love that. So, Mike, Shirley, what are the things you figured out how to make it work, and how's your sex after cancer?
I think that one of my favorite things, yes, we solved the intercourse problem and we were able to work with the pump and the pills and the punctures and the performance rings and everything like that. But some of our favorite moments are laying in bed, cuddling each other. I know you said not much of a cuddler, but I am a cuddler. And being able to have those moments. And then in the early mornings, that's really our sexual times because there's a well known fact about Viagra that everybody else knew, but I didn't know, is that it works best on an empty stomach. And so there is no time where there is no time when your stomach is more empty than first thing in the morning. And I was taking the Viagra in the evening and having no success at all. Like, okay, what is the deal with this? And I took one morning when I got up just to go use the restroom, and I went back to bed. And like 45 minutes later, it was on, and I thought, morning time. And so, I'm sure there are a lot of women out there that would say, leave me alone, I'm sleeping or whatever. But the beautiful part about Shirley is she gets up early in the morning. So morning times are our sexual times, and I say night times are our cuddle times. And when you have the threat of anything, I think it's human nature. When you have the threat of anything being taken away from you, you become acutely more appreciative of it. And sex for us is one of those things. With her endometrial uterine cancer, there was a chance to where she was only going to feel pain during intercourse. Well, fortunately, that did not happen. With the double mastectomies, maybe she was going to be disfigured and not beautiful, but hey, we're on our fourth set of breasts now. So we are, and she just gets more beautiful each time, because one thing they have to do is keep enlarging the breast each time. So and the reason she's had to have them replaced is because silicone leakage occurs after a number of years with breast replacements. And early on, she did the Angelina Jolie surgery, which was what you were talking about, being preemptive, because breast cancer ran in her family with the BRCA gene. And so she took care of that in her 30s, is why she had to have the mastectomies and the reconstructions like that. But that has only enhanced our scenarios. And my favorite part about all of this is when it's threatened to be taken away from you and you have any success with it. Look, if it wasn't intercourse, if you had manual or oral or whatever kind of sex you can have, the favorite part I have is that we laugh. We sometimes uncontrollably start laughing, and it's after we've had a sexual experience of any kind. We just laugh, and it just comes out of nowhere. So I would say that's my favorite time. And I think that Daniel alluded to it too. Your body, when you lose one sense in your body, it seems like the others pick up. And I'll give you a piece of too much information that I haven't shared on any podcast. I found out that my nipples were sensitive. Who knew it? A guy's nipples, of all things. And when she started messing around with my nipples one day, I'm thinking that put the Viagra to work. And so I thought, how in the world would a guy be having this much pleasure because of that? And so
he's not bashful.
So and thank God she's not either, away from the podcast. So as far as that goes, so
The only thing I'll say about all this is I was very, very bashful about all this as we met and got married, and I felt all I ever told him was our sex life and our life at home stays at home, and that was all I ever asked him. But with the cancer, it brought on a whole new ballgame to where I am sitting here. I never thought I'd be doing this kind of stuff. I really and truly would not. And as far as when that first sex toy came, that pump, I was, oh my God, no way. I mean, seriously, but I had to realize the elephant in the room, and I had to open my eyes to the fact, if we're going to get him back to normal and get our lives back to where we can enjoy it, basically, I had to go and hold that piece of equipment. I had to watch him use it in order for me to break my barrier of not wanting, and this is the first time I've ever shared this, not walking away, because that's not what I wanted to do. But oh gosh, it took a little while for me to come around to, are you sure? It's just, but I learned it's not going to hurt him, and it does help, and it is a great tool. And some of the other tools have been just equally as good. But that's the thing I share as far as when Tim was talking about, he got a divorce. I was sitting here with my head thinking, so how do you introduce this new world that you're in, Tim, to people you're starting to date or invest this in?
Yeah, thanks.
It's
It's a
got to
really
be. I mean, you did share some of it. You know, that I
mm,
was thinking, how in the world do you introduce this to a brand new person you're just meeting? And
Tim?
you've got a wife, but now all of a sudden you don't have that wife anymore because of this. But then you've got to go out there and break a barrier and see how someone accepts it. And he shared that very beautifully.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I was kind of fortunate in a way that I'd written this book and it was out in the world and it received, quite a bit of media attention in Australia. And so I've had kind of four kind of relatively short relationships since the marriage ended, but all but one of the women had read the book and the other one knew of the book. So it kind of broke the ice in a sense. So if a woman was interested in me after reading the book, I kind of thought, wow, like they must be interested. Like this hasn't been a deterrent. When I wrote the book, I could never have imagined that, it would not just sort of exclude me from the potential for a relationship. And in fact, the first woman that I dated had listened to the audio book and she sent me a DM on Twitter. And we knew of each other. We're both writers and we'd crossed paths at writers' festivals and things. I mean, an interesting aspect to that is I've never been on dating apps. A few of my mates who are, divorced are all over the dating apps, and I just didn't really have an appetite for that kind of thing. But my friends tease me that writers' festivals are like dating apps for me. So you go along to a writers' festival and you can learn a lot about a person by reading their book. And so, yeah, I'd connected with three of the women I dated were from writers' festivals. And it plunges you into a level of intimacy because you've read each other's stories that really sort of accelerates that process of getting to know each other. And I found that really helpful. But if someone wasn't deterred by reading my book, I thought, well, there's really something here. And women are amazing. I've been so blown away by how accepting and how sensitive and accommodating women have been around my circumstances and not turned off by my diagnosis and the impacts of treatment. And they've all been similar in just promoting and encouraging this sense of just a playful exploration and no pressure on performance. And that also they've really liked the fact that they're not going to, as I said earlier, they're not going to get swamped by a man's libido and a man's desire, and they feel safe. And then that seems to have allowed them to really step into their sexuality. And this has been a revelation to me. And I think it's something more men should probably be aware of, that if they can be less kind of forceful in their expression of their desire, it creates a space for a woman to step into. And that's probably been one of the most positive aspects of
I
this
think your term,
experience.
the icebreaker, fits all of us. To be honest with you, that's a great term for it.
Yes, and the defibrillator, bringing you back to life. I love it. All right, guys, I want to do a rapid fire. So this time I'm going to put out one line and I want you to give one line back. So not the long stories. This is the quick rat-tat-tat-tat-tat version. Okay. Anyone who wants can jump in. Line one, complete the sentence. The biggest myth about sex and cancer for men is?
It's all the same.
And it can't be enjoyable.
Fabulous. Okay, Daniel, what's the one thing you want every cancer to say to their male cancer patients about sex that none of them are saying right now?
Learn new tricks, be flexible, and it is all about you sometimes.
Beautiful. All right. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice about intimacy before your very first treatment, what would it be?
I would say just make it a priority in whatever form it takes. Just prioritize whatever kind of physical and emotional intimacy is possible.
Put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Say the line again, Joe.
So, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice about intimacy before your very first treatment, what would it be?
Allow yourself to be held.
Oh, it's beautiful. Mike and Shirley, for your 49th anniversary, may I suggest going to a sex toy store? There's some very fun stuff in there.
Hey, listen, I'm all in with that. I'm all in with that, but I will say this as the end of the sex toy story was that when Melissa pretty much introduced us to the injection side, none of my people at my office that I was going to for medical help, no one ever suggested that. However, they had been doing that there at that office for 15 years, but no one suggested it to me. And so when I found out about it on the Penis Project, my first phone call the next morning was, why hasn't anybody suggested this to me?
Right. Right. We need our medical teams to realize that our sexual beings are part of who we are. And yes, we are grateful to be alive. Of course, we can be grateful to be alive before cancer and after cancer. It doesn't mean we don't want intimacy. So, help us find a way to it. All right. True or false? And you can give more than just the one word answer. Men have it harder than women when it comes to talking about sex after cancer.
True. Added to that, yes, I think we are taught from a young age that talking as men to talk about sex is in a dirty way. It's a gruntal, primitive way, and not in essential, lovable, um, take care of each other kind of way. Um, and even as gay men, it's very, you know, we learned about sex in the same way.
Okay. True or false, Tim?
Yeah, I think so. I think men just probably aren't as good at talking about this kind of stuff. I hear women speak much more openly about their sexuality than men do. And as Daniel says, when men do, it tends to be a pretty sort of crude version of sexuality. And I've been educated by the women who I've been out with, and I think developed a greater sensitivity and a greater awareness of what's possible. So yeah, I think women are just better at talking about this stuff generally.
All right, Mike and Shirley.
I think that 1,000% women are better talking about it. But something early on that happened to me was I was speaking to my brother-in-law who had been through the surgery, and and my eyes were opened on that, because when I asked him about the sexual effect, he said, "Oh, I hadn't had that in years. We don't worry about that." And I thought that was speaking a whole different language to me. So what it taught me was that there are so many people who have lost the intimacy in their lives, not necessarily sexual intercourse being the centerpiece of that, but they've lost the desire for each other. And that's what we haven't experienced yet in our lives. I mean, health may come at us in a way that it stops this current party that we have going on. But it's like every day we kind of renew it, because I know that around the corner could be, the end of that part of our lives. And we've both openly talked about that and said, hey, one day I might not be able to do this at all. Just physically, you might not be able to just get in and out of bed by yourself. So, life comes at you fast. And so I think definitely women, because whenever I have tried to bring it up with guys, they shy away from it. Now, people have asked me about the prostate cancer effects, and it has opened the door for me to have a conversation with people who I never thought that I would have a conversation with. So I think definitely women talk about it easier, but once a guy cracks the door open with another guy, you find out they kind of want to talk about it too. They just don't.
So, to anyone listening, and if you're going through this, like, it's a conversation to have, and there are people who will have it with you, and it's normal to be worried about it. It's normal to want it. It's normal. There are times when you don't want, and all of that is okay. All right, last rapid fire question, and I ask it on every podcast. I want all three of you to answer. What's your advice for someone looking to kick cancer's ass? And for this group, specifically when it comes to reclaiming your intimate life?
There are ways for everybody to have intimacy. There are ways for everyone to be able to have intercourse. There are tools that will provide that if that is what you're interested in.
I think I would say be vulnerable. You know, men aren't really great at vulnerability a lot of the time. And when you can kind of open yourself up and make yourself vulnerable, it just does create possibility. And be creative, be imaginative. And if something is important to you, then, you know, make it a priority. And whatever form it takes, it can be a real source of joy and pleasure in your life.
I think the secret would be to embrace the new regular in your life. And um, going, for me, what has helped is going through the 5 steps of grievance and grieving and letting go of who I was before cancer and thanking him for everything that he did. And then embracing who I am today and making that my regular and having that base to start up from. Because if I still think I'm the same person that I was 10 years ago, I will always feel like I'm not enough. I will always feel like I'm not reaching my goal. I'll never be 100%. And I have to embrace this Daniel G. Garza and tell him, you are good enough and people love you and your partner finds you attractive. And it's okay that you can't do what you used to do, but look at all the things you can do now and look at all the things you've discovered.
That's fantastic. Thank you, guys. So, if people want to learn more about you or the things you do, Daniel, tell us a little bit about, is it, I can't, how do you say your production company
Oh,
and the,
Little Mexican, yes. So if you want to find out more about me, visit littlemexican.net, which is my production company. You can also go on my Instagram, which is I am Daniel G. Garza, easy to find. And I'm also the outreach director for Cheeky Charity, which is a virtual support group for anal and colorectal cancer. And we host bi-monthly virtual support groups across the country. And you can find me at events and pride events and speaking engagements. But I am Daniel G. Garza everywhere. Just look for me there.
and we will put that in the show notes. Tim, how can people find you?
Yeah, look, I've got a website, bytimbaker.com, by Tim Baker, and I'm reasonably active on Instagram and LinkedIn. My Instagram handle's by Tim Baker. And yeah, I'm pretty active in that sort of patient advocacy space. And I've got a whole bunch of books out there. The one most relevant to this conversation is, as I said, Patting the Shark.
But the surfing books look awesome as well.
Oh yeah, if you're interested in surfing, I've got you covered. Yeah.
And Mike and Shirley, I know you do this. This is a passion to share with others. Is there any way for people to follow up with you, social or what have you?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind you posting my email address on it. Mike Prescott.165 on Instagram. So
all right,
anybody who would want to talk, that's what we do best is talk.
That's very generous of you, of all of you. Thank you guys for sharing, for being so authentic, so vulnerable. You're going to help so many people. So I want to close this out. You know, all of us are survivors. We never choose the pitch, but we always get to choose our swing. I'm Joelle Kaufman. Please share this episode with a man who needs to know that his intimate life is worth fighting for and is possible, or with his partner.